don't know.
Okay.
They're very simple questions. Some of them I know the answer to.
Answer yes and no.
Mhm. Some of them are going to seem a little silly because I know the answer to them, but I want them down just for the record's sake.
Well, I hate to interrupt you, but give me my coffee before you start.
Oh, sure, sure. We're not started yet.
I won't get in the middle of that with your interview.
We can pause it if you need to go upstairs or anything. We can pause the camera.
Well, we might. We're both on. I'm on water.
No, I'm all right. I'm empty now.
I did
Yeah.
before I
Hey,
came over.
hey,
That's
teacher.
the hour.
Oh, here, and you can just put it
This-
right there.
This means I got to go to the bathroom. This means, well, I'll take a little longer. This means this is an emergency.
Here, we
That's
can.
all right.
Well, I
That's
guess
okay.
that's got a lot of.
I can reach you.
Mm-hmm.
While you're interviewing Dad, I'll reach you and get it.
Yeah, and then I'll be panning the camera back and forth too. The only thing I would ask is try not to, when somebody's talking, try not to interrupt because I might be on them close and then I don't want to have to swing it back real fast. You know what I'm saying? But if you have something to add, go ahead and join in. I mean, we'll just see how it. Okay, this is December 27th, 1997, and we're interviewing Mom and Dad Ware for just a little trip down memory lane here. Okay, Dad, where were you born?
I was born in Knox County in Elby Township at my my great aunt and uncle aunt's Bailey sisters. I was born in November 22nd, 1915.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Mom?
I was born near Dunlap, Illinois on August 9th, 1921,
You need to speak up just a little.
on a farm southwest of Dunlap.
Okay. And where did you grow up? What were the names of different places that you lived as you were growing up?
When I was taken to Camp Grove, lived there till I was 5 years old, and then we went to La Prairie Center, which is close to Sparland, Illinois, and then we moved to Elmwood, where I had already started grade school at La Prairie Center. I was in third grade, and then we went from Elmwood, we moved north of Brimfield about 2 miles. I finished grade school almost there. My 8th grade, we moved east of Brimfield, and I lived there for 5 years and attended high school in Brimfield.
Okay. And what were your grade school years like in terms of like the one-room schoolhouse, long walks in the winter time through the snow? Like how far did you walk to school? That
Well,
kind of
most
thing?
I ever walked was 1.5 miles, and if it was real bad, my dad would take us either by wagon and horses or by the Model T car.
Mm-hmm.
I never walked real far.
Do you remember the name of the grade school you went to?
Oh, sure. I started in La Prairie Center grade school, and then Elmwood grade school, and then up to Maple Grove, north of Brimfield, and then I graduated from the Cahill School, east of Brimfield.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
So
grade
you went to
schools.
quite a few different schools
yes.
as a result of living different places.
Right.
What was a one-room schoolhouse like compared to, say, the school that all of us kids went to?
It was quite interesting. You had from 8th grade down to 1st, and as I was a 1st grader, the 8th graders and 7th graders often helped with our reading or spelling, helped the teachers out.
Mm-hmm. So they.
And I had the same then. I graduated up to it as I stayed in the 8th grade and so forth.
Mm-hmm. So they kind of worked as teachers' aides then.
Oh yeah, they love to do it.
And Dad, what were your grade school years like? In terms of how far you had to go to school and.
Well, the first grade school was a Corey grade school. It was about a little over 1 mile from where we lived, and when Dad was working in the fields, we either walked or we had neighbors. I had Aunt Edna Smith, my dad's sister, that would take us, and another neighbor, Jim Sloan. We'd ride, but a good share of the time, if the weather was nice, we walked, and we always walked usually in a group with the other kids. And we had on the average of from about 16 to 20 students in the whole school.
Not too many then.
No,
Do,
no.
do you feel like you learned quite a bit in that environment?
We learned the basics. We learned to read, write, spell, and do arithmetic, studied geography and history. We didn't have much selection of courses. We just took whatever was offered. And we had excellent teachers for the most part, very dedicated people that did everything from teaching, janitor, disciplinarian, went out in the playground and played with us. So we had a good experience in our schools.
Can you think of any particular memories with the grade school kids, or?
Well, one memory I can have is most of the schools we'd have a program and a potluck supper once a month, and it was good fellowship. We learned, we got acquainted with all the neighbors and had good time putting on little skits, little plays. Had recitation as far as from some of the children, and we have a lot of pleasant memories. It was part of our social life as well as our learning experience.
And did you live in the house, that little white house on Yates City? How long did you live there?
I never lived in Yates City.
I mean the farm.
The
near,
farm.
near Yates.
Where I was born was north and a little bit west of Yates City. I only lived there from November until February, and my folks and all of us, of course, moved to Uncle George Matthews' farm, and Dad farmed that for 11 years, 240 acres. And then in about 1925, we moved down to what we call the old Ware home place, and I lived there until 1940, when I went to seek my fortune in Peoria. I went to work in the shop.
Can you describe that house?
The first house?
The Ware house, the Ware estate.
The Ware house, yes. It is a French provincial all brick house. We had fireplace in every room. Of course, we only used one. It had bricked up, and we had, of course, a coal furnace. We had, it was very spacious. Our living room and parlor was all adjoined, and we could have, when we had, used to have high school class parties, we'd have player games and everything else, and used to even have some square dancing with some of the neighbors a time or two. So we had enough room. We had plenty of available room. I might tell you one other thing. One of our bedrooms had been changed. My Uncle Kenton Ware, Dad's youngest brother, had a billiard table, and us young fellows, high school and even past, in the wintertime, used to have a lot of good recreation up there playing billiards.
And you got pretty good at it too, didn't you?
Well, I was never any pool shark, but we just had a lot of good times.
And who played with you up there?
It was neighbor boys.
So that was one of your main pastimes when you were...
Well, that was one of them.
When
I liked to hunt during the hunting season, and we had a lot of things we do when we was raised in the country. We had what they called an opera house in Yates, and they'd put on plays there all during the winter. And then we went, of course, to high school, had a lot of social functions as well as basketball, softball, and track. So we had plenty of things to do to keep life interesting.
Mom, what was growing up like at your house?
Oh, we had lots of fun. With my brothers, I was a tomboy, and I loved to ride horses. I had a pony first, and that got me in the spirit to ride the horses. And my pony got burned up in a barn fire at Le Prairie Center in about 1928, and that was kind of a trauma because we lost her. She was a real pretty black Shetland and had a white star on her face, around her ears. And the brothers were fun. They did a lot of teasing. We used to go sledding at Elmwood on the hills there. And one thing that I particularly remember I enjoyed with Uncle Kenny, since he was my brother next to me, he's just a couple of years older than I am, 2.5, I guess. We had an old mill that had been used for grinding flour. And my folks let us play up there, and Dad had his machinery stored up there. And we took the old bottoms of the stoves in the summertime that sat under the heating stoves in the winter and used my dad's horses. Now that's a type of horses you use for cutting out lumber and so forth with, and put the stove bottoms on top of that and made us some play places. And we had cigar boxes and old houses we built and pieces of board we made for running our cars. And I might say that here's 2 of the cars that we played with back in those days. That is probably about a 1927 Chevy. I'm not positive. And this one was a tractor that belonged to one of my brothers, and it fell down the well. My dad was doing a cistern, and it went down the well, and he re-cemented the cistern and found our tractor. And that was at Lake Prairie Center. So we had old spools we used for people, and we just had a lot of fun up there. Hardly ever did Mom find us. If she wanted us, she'd bring us out cookies out to the mill, which is just a short distance away. But hot as it was, we played up there barefooted in summer clothes. Then we got bored with that. We'd go horseback riding if Dad wasn't using the horses.
Mom, what special things did you do with your family, let's say at night when you had a little time and after all the chores were done on the farm?
Well, one of the things in the wintertime that Kenny and I did when I was small, this would be, and I'd be 5 to 8 maybe, we'd take the kerosene lamp out in the kitchen, and there again we'd turn the lights up and down and play with the toys, and we had a lot of imagination, the two of us. It was always the neighbor kids, neighbor people that we would talk about.
How far were your neighbors away from you?
Oh, not anymore, probably a mile, half a mile. I might mention one thing that as we got older, Mom read to us a great deal too, but as I got older, I learned to read, and then I liked to read. So the years went by, and I wasn't always playing with my brothers. I would read a lot.
Did you have a piano in your house?
Oh, yes.
And who played?
Oh, well, the two older brothers got the lessons.
Oh, really?
Yes, because we come into the Depression years about the time I was ready to play.
And now your two older brothers would be Roscoe and Uncle Robert.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't care enough about it. And would come time for Kenny and I think we both would have played. Mother didn't have the money, and I don't know. She could have taught us, but she didn't have a lot of time. Being a farmer's wife, she was busy. So.
Did you spend a lot of time around the piano, singing?
Oh,
and
yeah.
playing music?
In the high school years, I did. Yeah, more so than I did before that. I'd like to go back to just to mention one thing. I said we didn't walk to school. We walked to school, as Dad said, when the weather was nice. But we also walked to school to Lake Prairie Center because it wasn't very far. And we would hike over the fields, and sometimes we'd get in up over our overshoes in the snow, and then our feet would be wet, our socks would be wet. Teacher would have us take our socks off around the stove, and we'd sit around the stove in the one-room school and get ourselves dried out. And still, I'd often have chapped legs and stuff from the winter months, and I think your dad probably did too. Long underwear.
You didn't have hot and cold running water.
Oh, no.
What did you do for things that we take for granted like baths, for instance? We fill up a hot tub and take a bath.
Hot tub out in the kitchen around the range on a Saturday night once a week, and put warm hot water in there, and each person took their turn.
And then you didn't have an indoor bathroom either.
Oh, no, we run outside.
I understand you came pretty familiar with the Sears catalog out there.
Yep. Only thing we didn't like was the slip pages on it. But we often would sit out there and look at it and look at the pictures and read it. So it was good for two things.
What kind of things did you dream about that if you read the catalog, things you would like to have? Do you remember?
Toys, of course, when we were youngsters.
Uh-huh.
Yes. We had quite a few, but not as many as the kids do today.
Oh, no. That's probably better.
We made more of our own things.
Mm-hmm.
Kenny and I was always into my dad's tools in Elmwood. That's when he had a tool shop down underneath of this mill. And we'd go down there and make boats by pounding in nails around a piece of wood, and then take a string and put around that and make a railing around it, and we'd play with that. Use your own imagination. I'm sure your dad did too.
Oh, yeah. What was the quality of your family like? Family time that you spent together, things you did on an annual basis, like threshing, harvesting, dinners, any special events, Christmas?
We had very close family knit ties. My grandparents lived in Elmwood when I was little, and then as the years went by, my Aunt Nell and Uncle John Hicks bought the house from Grandma and Grandpa, and then by that time we were living at Brimfield, and she would always come up and help Mother with the thresherman's food and getting the big meals ready, and they outdid each other. I think the farmers did, because they always had extremely good meals. Your dad can tell you that. Iced tea was a special because we just had well water, but that particular days we were always allowed to go get ice from the ice house in Burnfield, and
Mhm.
it was packed in sawdust, and we'd rinse it off and put it in the big ice. Mom had about a 5-gallon crock, and they'd make the iced tea in that, and that was a favorite drink when it was warm.
Mhm.
I got to take the horse and the wagon, and I'd take the water out to the men in the fields. It was nothing for them to have a big chaw of tobacco in their mouth and spit it out and rinse out their mouth and then drink. And they all drink out of the same jug, and they lived right through it. So we used to have about 3 jugs of water on the. Well, the horse had it was just a breaker cart, and
Mhm.
2 of us could ride in her.
Mhm.
I'd do it alone though.
And Dad, what were some of your growing up years on the farm like that you can remember? Routine things that you did, chores, or
Well,
What
we
was
always
it?
kept busy. We as children always had chores to do. One of the chores we had was like when Dad was working the field was put the feed in for the horses and the cows, and for the chicken, gather the eggs. So we never lacked for things to do.
Mm-hmm. What about the threshing time for you? Isn't that kind of a
Well, that
special
was
time?
always a real warm weather, but we had a lot of good times together. They would always, most of the time when we were still threshing, we used the old steam powered threshing machine and the big separator, and it would take a crew. We usually had a crew of about 28 to 30 men, and we'd go around to all around about 14 different farms. And like Helen said, the housewives, the mothers, put everything from the basic food to pie, cake, and even ice cream. So, and then after it was all over, we'd usually have a picnic, and everybody'd go to some park not too far away and have a picnic. So, had a lot of fellowship, and everybody knew everybody. It was a very interesting time.
What did you do special at Christmas time? Anything you can
Well, we
remember?
usually had a Christmas Eve party at my great aunt's, and my Uncle Kenton Ware would always play Santa Claus, and he was a natural. And then Christmas Day, different families would have the dinner, and my dad had one brother and 4 sisters, so we didn't lack for family. But we always had good times. We used to have quite a few of them at the old home place because we had a lot of room there.
Mm-hmm. How tall were the ceilings in that home?
Well, the ceilings downstairs were 11 feet,
Mm-hmm.
and the ceilings upstairs were 10, so we had plenty of elbow room.
What was the winters like in that home in terms of how did you stay warm at night? How did you heat the house?
Well, the bedrooms weren't heated. Just a little heat would trickle up into those, and we had feather beds, and they was we'd fluff them up when we'd make the bed, and when we crawl into them, the bed would just kind of surround you, and then we had wool blankets. In fact, it was below freezing. If the weather got real cold outside, it was below freezing in those bedrooms. I can remember when after Helen and I were married, we'd go out to the old farm because Dad and Mom still lived on the farm. It was real cold. It was quite a little getting used to from sleeping in a heated room to one that wasn't heated, but we survived it okay.
How did they heat the part of the house that you lived in, the living room?
Well, it was heated good. We had the second house, or the house of the old Ware homestead, had a furnace, and Dad wasn't hesitant about putting plenty of coal in,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a big furnace, and we could heat the 2 living room and dining room real well with that. We had a fireplace in there we used to use just on occasion, and then of course the kitchen was heated by the range that we cooked on because it was too far away from the furnace to heat.
What did you have in terms of transportation that you and your family did you have horse and
Well,
carriage, or what did you
the first car that we owned, I was just barely old enough to remember when Dad purchased it. It was 1918. It was Overland 90. But when the roads got bad, we had to depend on the horses. It was either, if it was snow on the ground, it was either a bobsled or what they called a cutter, a little sleigh that the very most 4 people, it only had 1 seat, I remember 4 of us, and possibly once in a while 5 could ride in it, but mostly it was either buggy, horse and buggy, or wagon, bobsled, or sleigh. That was our, when the roads got bad, and we never had improved roads, had just dirt roads until 1938.
I understand that you had a car in high school.
I had no Model T. I went with a neighbor boy, had no Model T that took us to, that we rode with most of the time. And then Dad bought me an old Model T coupe, a 1918 Model T coupe that I drove sophomore through senior year. He paid $10 for it and $6 for the license, but it did take quite a few parts to keep it maintained.
I bet it did. So you didn't have it any longer after your senior year?
No.
Uh-huh. Mom, what did you have? What did your dad have growing up to drive around in?
We had mostly Model Ts, and every summer he would have the back end of the car hoisted up into a tree. That was a common thing with a Model T, and put a new rear end in it because the rear end kept going out with the rutted roads and the mud.
Mm-hmm.
But for transportation, when the weather was really bad, snow and stuff, he would put bobsled runners on the wagon box and throw straw in the wagon, and we was, as little ones, we'd go to church and up to the stores in the nearest town with that way, cover up with it. We had blankets too.
Where do you remember going to church at?
We started, well, I've been in church all my life, Larry. We started in the first time, what I remember, was Camp Grove, because I was just 4 months old and they moved me there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a Camp Grove Methodist, and then we came down to the La Prairie Center is still in existence, the La Prairie Center store, and I don't know about the store, but the church is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And we often, my mother taught Bible school and Sunday school and played the piano, and we'd often, that would be just like Dad said, that was the center function of the little community. It would be mostly farmers that would be around. Some other interesting things at La Prairie Center, because that was in the days when the roads were all mud. We had maybe one gravel road, but our main road was into Chillicothe, but we went to Princeville, which is where my grandmother and grandfather Pullen lived, to get our groceries. And when it came time for Roscoe and Robert to be in high school, there was no school buses, there was no roads in those days for them. And Grandma Pullen kept the 2 older boys, and they put them in high school, and they would stay with them and walk to school, and then they'd come home if we could get to them. They'd come home weekends. Some.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't always.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you remember about Roscoe growing up?
Oh golly, I can remember mostly about him always being the leader of the pack. He was on the go, I guess, from the time he was born on. Mother told some stories about him getting caught over a well in a diaper when he and Robert and Roscoe were both babies, because they're only 13 months apart. And here he was hanging over the well in the diaper when they found him, and he always had the dog with him. And I guess he'd run off. He was probably about 2 at the time. And I can remember Mother telling about having sheep. Now this was on this farm where I was born at Dunlap. Having sheep, and they had a goat that led the sheep. And during my childhood, I never knew Dad ever had sheep, but Mother come out one time, and I guess she was outside in the barnyard, and Robert and Roscoe jumped up in the wagon, and Robert yelled to the goat, "Get her, Buck, get her, Buck." And the goat butted Mother in the rear end, knocked her over. And they often laughed about it, some of the fun we had. And of course it didn't hurt Mom. She probably got out of there. And she was young when she had the kids. She was only 28 or so when she had me. So I was a
She was
tail end.
how old?
About 28. I was a tail
28.
end of the 4.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she was 18 when she married. She was married, so. But
Yeah.
an unusual thing is when I was in high school, I had a baby brother born,
Mm-hmm.
which he didn't cut my nose off at all. I enjoyed him. At that time, I was 16. So
And that would be
that'd
Gerald.
be Uncle Gerald.
Uncle Gerald. When do you remember getting radio? Your family getting a radio?
About 1927. That was really an outgoing thing in our house.
Mm-hmm.
I think Robert was the instigator in getting it in there. I don't remember ever having a new radio. I could be wrong. It might have been, but a lot of the fellas in those days, including your own dad, built them from kits. they'd get a kit and they'd have the parts to go with,
Mhm.
but we had a radio about that time.
What do you remember listening to? Do you remember it in 1927? That'd be pretty. You'd be 6
I
years
was
old.
only about 6 years old. I can remember Fibber McGee and Molly if they were on the air at that time, and I can remember Mother listening to soap operas. She loved them, and they even had them. In those days, the Oxydol's Old Moll Perkins was on for years,
Mhm.
and as I got on through the years and I got into 6th and 7th grade, I listened to Little Orphan Annie and some of those things that were put on there for children.
Did you buy Ovaltine?
I never bought it, but we sure tried to drink it. Some of the kids had it in the home. It was pretty popular.
Dad, how about you? When did your family get radio? That was as big then as TV is now.
Well, the first radio we had was given to us by Clarence Rapley. It was a little Crosley. It was a regenerative set. I think it had 3 tubes. And it had a little speaker, or you could listen with headphones either way. I can't remember the exact year, but I was thinking it was along about 1928 or 29.
Mhm.
And then we had crystal sets. You could make those.
Mhm.
And they were very, if you put a good antenna out and had headphones, you could tune in some of the Chicago stations, WMBD. Then the first radio that we really had was a good radio. Dad bought in 1934. It was a Sears battery operated because we didn't have 110 voltage yet. So we went as early. I had an uncle that we used to go over to their house. Uncle Sam Mawson had one of the old, I don't remember the make of it, and then you could listen to the headphone. You had 3 different dials to tune it, and it had an exponential speaker, and we'd listen to some of the programs. So radio really came into popularity about I'd say about the middle 20s.
Mhm.
And then of course when we got 110 volts, they did have the high line, but they didn't have radios that operate off 110 yet.
But there were other ways of listening to music, of course, before radio.
Oh yes, phonograph was one of the mainstays in pretty near every home and playing records. Yeah.
I understand you went over to a favorite aunt to listen to her Victrola.
That's right, and Edna Smith, and she was quite an entertainer. We played all kinds of board games, and she had been a school teacher, and we just every time we went over there, we just have a real good time playing board games and playing. She always would play house like a store and all that kind of stuff, and dress up. So she was an entertainer.
How is she related to you?
She is one of my dad's sisters.
Okay.
Yeah. They lived within a mile of us all the years we lived on a George Matthews farm.
Do you remember what radio programs you liked to listen to in the heyday of radio?
Well, Amos and Andy, and like Fibber McGee and Molly, and then they had musical programs, and they even had plays. And some of the plays were comparable to the movies that we see today.
Mm-hmm.
So Lux Radio Theater, and there was a whole number of them. Then they had a lot of comedies like Jack Benny. They had the Fred Allen show, which was kind of like an amateur hour. And they had contests, so we didn't lack for entertainment as far as radio is concerned.
Mm-hmm. Mom, you had some music before you had a radio too, didn't you, in your family?
Oh yes, I forgot to mention that, Larry. I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and my folks went to some sale somewhere and purchased the Edison record player. I think you now own it,
Mm-hmm.
the old cylindrical one, and we had a bunch of records with it. And I was pretty small, so I didn't get to operate it until I got old enough to handle it. But my brothers and my folks stayed up quite late that first night. I think I was put to bed, but they watched it and listened to it. And of course, through the years, we all enjoyed it. It was, plus the piano that Mother had. That my mother always played a piano, and it was always quite a thing of fun on the farm. That we would have Grandpa Pullen, my own grandfather, would play the violin, and my mother would play the piano and chord with him, and the neighbors would roll up their rugs, and they would have square dances. This is when I lived at Camp Grove, and we had this much fun, and they loved that. Even my folks had it at their house too. They'd take turns, and there'd be just the farmer people, but they really enjoyed it. It almost reminds you of the old westerns on television, the way they had fun.
You must have had a good sized living room there.
Well, we
too.
had a good size homes.
Who-
The big farmhouses were pretty good size.
Who came over to the square dances?
It would be the neighbors mostly. My folks there. Your people in the country in the wintertime didn't travel too far,
Mm-hmm.
as it was extremely cold in horses and wagons.
Yeah.
And your old Model Ts and your cars, they weren't too good in mud. They were okay in the spring of the year, but I remember moving one time with Mom driving the Model T and Kenny holding the fishbowl with 2 goldfish in it, and she put the old Model T in the rut to go from Camp Grove, Illinois to Lake Prairie Center, which is probably 6 or 7 miles, taking the country roads, and the old Model T just go that way. And it swung and it hit and got most of the water out of the fishbowl all over Kenny. I don't know why Mom didn't put it in a fruit jar and put a lid on it, but she probably didn't think of it. But those are some of the fun we remember. So
Back to the Edison, do you remember what your parents paid for it?
yeah, they paid $7 for it. I can't tell you exactly how many records, but I would say 300 anyway, roughly.
So you had a good assortment of
Yes,
them.
they did.
Which
You got a good buy on that.
a few still survive.
Yeah, they do.
What are the entertainments I know that you did in the 30s would be you went to movies. Do you remember any particular movie that stands out that you
Oh yeah, that was Shirley Temple years to me. We lived close to Elmwood, and the Elmwood Theater is still in existence. And I chummed around pretty much with girls in those days, and my girlfriends and I'd go to movies.
Who are your girlfriends?
Mary Cullings was one. She's still a friend today. She's now Mary Lester. She used to run. Her dad run the cider mill north of the Elmwood Cemetery, and I had. Nellie Gallagher was another friend. She was a neighbor girl. And Mary Foster. Oh, I had 7 or 8 of them. Ollie Voney, I can't remember all of them anymore. But through the years, I had lots of fun with these girls in the Elmwood. Elmwood grade school was pretty good size. We had, in our grades there, we had about 30 kids. That was my first experience of being in a larger school from the one room. But then I went back to the one room, so. Then I had about 1 girl in my class for a while.
What movies did you go to? Did you go to movies, Dad?
Our first movies were silent movies. It cost a dime to go into the movie theater. We had one in Yates City that my Uncle Kenton run, and then they had one in Elmwood and one in Farmington. And when I got to high school age, we'd probably see a movie about once a week, so we saw a lot of good movies. I can't remember exactly when the sound came, but for the silent movies, we'd have somebody play the piano, and they'd play music to go along with kind of some of the things that was, if it was a very, like a war scene or horses running and things like that, it'd be a real fast one. If it was patriotic, it'd be patriotic music, and they really got a workout. I was trying to think the first sound picture, I think probably was around about 1929 or 30, somewhere along in there.
Actually, the jazz singer, 1927, is
Okay,
considered the
okay,
first sound,
okay.
although they synchronized records with that
Okay,
to
yeah,
make it sound.
yeah.
But really about the late 20s.
Yeah. And that was a big improvement. But we saw a lot of good shows, Covered Wagon, and a lot of historical movies, so it was very good entertainment. And with movies in the theaters in those days always had news and comics. They'd have a comic,
They
would take
read
part of it,
serials,
and
too.
then they'd have the news of the day. It wasn't quite as current as what the news we get now, but it was interesting because you could see the pictures and the action as well as hear the sound.
What were your high school years like at Yates City? Some of the friends you hung out with and some of the things that you did. I know you told me one funny story about driving around, and I can't remember whose car, but you were backfiring the car and...
Oh yes, that was Gordon McKeever, and he was driving his dad's car, and it had a cutout on it which would make plenty of noise, and that wasn't enough, so cut the ignition off, let it run a little bit, and turn it back on, and it backfired, just like a gun going off. he did it one too many times that it blew the cover off of the muffler. That kind of spoiled the fun. But I had a number of friends in high school. I didn't date through the high school years, but we did have class parties several times a year, and they had dances. We danced in the museum. So we had a lot of good times, we really did. I was in operettas and in plays, and used to sing
Danced
solo
in a
songs.
museum.
Beg pardon?
Danced in a museum.
In a gym.
You said
Gym,
museum.
I'm sorry. I stand corrected.
A gym museum.
Yeah,
A gym. Gymnasium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Tell me a little bit about your brother and sister, your sisters. I mean, in your case.
Well, I had one sister, Millard, which was about 2 years older than I, and I had my sister Florence, which was about 2.5 years younger. And I can remember I used to like to tease. Millard was old enough, but tease didn't bother her. But when I teased Florence, that kind of got the best of her. I got a little older. I wasn't quite so didn't torment quite as much. We had a lot of good times together. Millard, I might mention that Millard loved music and liked to play the piano. She was one that they never had to ask her to practice. She would practice and then play some more. And in the wintertime, we used to gather on the piano and just sing songs. And that was a very pleasant memory.
Mm-hmm. Can you remember of your father growing up?
My dad was a very hard-working man. He was a good farmer. He wasn't one that would talk to you an awful lot, but he was nice to work with. And I learned a lot of good things from my dad. He wasn't afraid to tackle for or anything.
You need to mention to Larry, he liked to jig. He was
Oh,
very
yes. But
active on his feet.
That's right.
I understand he did that in the morning. Is that right?
Well,
Would you get
yes.
up?
Anytime.
He, I remember one
remind me.
time, one cousin had Walter Smith, that he was a very quiet kid, and he wouldn't hardly say anything at all. And Dad would get him to smile because he would kick her up over his head and kick the over the doorway, over the top of the doorway. So he was pretty agile.
I guess so. I remember once you telling me about your dad that he could do 3 figures multiplication in his head. Is that right?
Right. He would. Well, a lot of things you'd have to figure out, like in how much seed to put on the land, or figure out how much bin would hold of grain, and he could carry those figures right in his head because he just practiced at it. Didn't do it all with pencil and paper.
Mm-hmm. Mom, tell me about your dad. What kind of a man was he?
Oh, he was a typical, very talkative farmer. He was, we rented tenant farms. I don't know whether people know what that is or not, but you would rent the farm and pay so much cash rent for certain crops. Your landlady would get half of them, or part of them anyway. And then he would raise hogs and chickens and so forth for extra money. And the pigs was his money, which he would sell them, and that's what he would pay his cash rent with.
Mm-hmm.
And he got half of the crops, but he was a lot of fun. My dad liked to square dance, as I mentioned once, and he taught me to square dance when I was about 7th and 8th grade. It was the old time square dancing. We used to go to Brimfield, down to the Cecil hardware store, and my folks were quite active there. It was still the same farmers, and mother was shy, dad wasn't, and she'd go with him, and she was a good dancer, but she would sit on the sidelines if he didn't go get her and get her out, and they mostly danced together. But Dad was very outgoing. He was well liked. He attended farm sales. There wasn't any community he wasn't a part of. But so was Dad Ware, as far as that goes, if I remember from him. But my dad would, some of the things that you might find funny today is we used our car for everything. It was a truck to Dad. If he went to a farm sale and took a notion to bring a boar pig home for his pigs to raise for the next year, the boar pig, he'd take the seed out before he'd go and bring the boar pig back in the back of the car. And then you'd have to take the car and he'd have to scrub it all out. mother used to protest on that, but it didn't do her much good. We survived. The car wasn't. He'd clean it up.
Yeah, and let's see. You mentioned the barn that burned.
I might just mention that was kind of a tragedy in the family. I was probably about 8, I think. Larry was just. It was 1928. I was 7, I guess, and we had just finished thrashing. And when people did the thrashing in those days, at this particular time anyway, the straw went into what they call the part of the haymow. It blew it in there with a blower from the threshing machine. And Dad had grain in the barn, and he had hay in there. And the grain was put in granaries underneath of the straw. It was a 2-floor barn. And combustion was caused from this and caused the fire. From being hot or something when
They
it was
call
blowing
it
in.
spontaneous
Yeah.
combustion.
And we came to about, my mom did, and Dad, the dog was a barking, and he was a little terrier, and he was really a cutting up Ned. He was outdoors, and he got barking. The folks got up to see what was the matter, and the barn was on fire. And that particular night, due to the fact that Dad was tired, it was threshing time, he had left 4 horses and our pony in the barn. But he had put all the cattle out. The cattle were out in the pasture. That they often did in the summertime because it got hot. I don't know why he didn't put the horses and the pony out, but he didn't because he had places to put them. And one of our horses got out and came down the road toward our house. We lived about probably a block. The landlady's house was near the barn.
What farm was this?
This was at Lake Prairie Center.
Prairie Center.
It was, I can't think of the name of the landlady that owned it, but she lived right there too. And it was a beautiful barn. Well, I'm describing it. It wasn't very many barns that had the granaries inside. And so Robert went out in his underwear. He was a little bit of a mite, but he was probably a freshman in high school. And he caught the horse and brought her in, and they covered her with linseed oil. And Dad and Mom doctored her for days to get her healed. She was burned. And we kept the horse, and every time that it would rain and hail on the tin roof of the barn, she would back up in her stall and just snort. It reminded her of the burning of the fire. But I lost my pony, and we lost our 3 other horses. Dad had some other horses. We had about 11 head at that time. But he had to go out and buy 2 more teams of horses. So they run the grain through a fan mill to try to retrieve that, to get some of the burnt grain out of the oats and wheat that Dad had stocked in there. And they were able to salvage some, but he had to replace all the grain, all the horses, all the hay, all the harness, and part of his farm machinery. So it was quite a blow to my folks.
What can you tell me about your mom?
Mom was typical housewife. She was a real fast worker, a hard worker, and she could get over housework while I was looking at it after I got old enough to help. She would, I would say, almost too fast sometimes. She wasn't thorough.
Oh.
I mean by that the house was kept clean, but she was a good cook, she was a good baker, she was a good mom. And she always had time to do something with you. As the years went by and I learned to drive the car, she drove it first. And then she quit driving when everybody else in the family, because we had 4 car drivers, plus Dad. And so she just gave up the driving. We got a Model A then, and we had the stick shift. And she never did learn too well on that. But I can come home from school many a time and remember her having stuff to do. She was at butchering time. She was the one that put the quarters of beef on the big tables. They'd pull a kitchen table out, and she'd saw it and cut it up. She'd put the hams in brine. She'd make the sausage. Everything was done in those days, from the casings of the intestines of the animals. It was put in salt brine and soaked. And then you'd put your meat back, your sausage back in there. And that may sound funny to people in town, but that was good sausage. And we didn't think anything about eating the casings of the intestines. It was thoroughly cleaned out. Pig's brains, anything. She didn't make any difference what it was. I don't think any farmer, and I'm sure Jim, your dad here's parents did the same, but about all left of the pig or the cow would be the pigtail, especially the pig.
Might mention that Mother Pullen loved children. Any baby that was born, any of her grandchildren, of course her own children, like she won their hearts. She just really loved all of our grandchildren.
Yeah, that's something that I remember very much about her.
Right.
Dad, what can you tell me about your mother? Where she came from? I'd like to know a little bit
All
about
right.
her background.
My mother was born in Ireland, the very northern tip of Ireland, lived on a farm.
Do you know the name of the town?
Yes, the town was Coleraine, and wouldn't be hard to find a map. I think they had around about 40 acres of land, which was a fairly decent-sized farm in Ireland. And they had a peat bog. They used peat for their fuel, not only to heat their house they lived in. It was a big old limestone house with a thatch roof. Had a fireplace. They cooked on the fireplace and used it for heat both. Mother had 3 brothers and a sister. And after her folks passed away and they took care of an uncle, they came to Farmington, Illinois, where they stayed with one of their uncles, Uncle William Robertson. And that's how she met Dad. She didn't have, in fact, her mother died when she was only about 8 years old, and she took on the responsibility, you might say, of a housewife and a mother at a very tender age. So she only had about 3.5 years of grade school, of formal schooling. But she worked out at farm homes, and that's how she met my dad.
Oh, at one of the farm homes.
That's right. They lived close by.
I think.
Well, it was the lady she worked for, Mrs. Zook, that introduced my folks.
I think you need to mention there, Jim, that your mother was the oldest of the family, and she
No.
moved the brothers and sister from Ireland to United States
That's
by
right.
herself.
Now, Mother was about 21 when she came over to this
So it
country.
was quite something to do.
Quite an adventure.
Yes, it was.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. What can you tell me, Dad? I'll take you first on this one about your grandparents on both sides.
Well, I had 2 grandparents. I had great-grandmother Bailey. I remember her well. She lived until I was 7 years old. She was, I can't remember exact age, but I think it was around 84 years old. Very delightful person, a lot of fun. And then my other grandmother, or other grandparent, was Grandmother Ware.
Mm-hmm.
Her name was Edith Ware, and she would come around to our house at least and stay with us for a week and do sewing. Sew shirts, dresses for the girls, pajamas, underwear, and always at Christmas I'd either knit us socks or mittens. She was a very kind, very delightful person. I think I was around about 14 when she passed away. They moved off the old home place when my dad moved down there on it and moved and bought a house in Yates City and lived in there.
So these would be the parents of your dad.
Parents of my dad, that's
now
right.
you didn't know the parents
Both of my mother's parents were deceased before they came over to this country.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
May I interrupt on the Baileys and ask you to mention the fact that all your great grandmother, your grandmother, and her sisters were all named for the township?
Yes,
That's important.
the counties were all divided into townships, and they lived in Elba Township, which was right in the pretty much southeast corner of Knox County. And my grandmother Ware, her name was Edith. That was the first letter of Elba, and then Laura, and Bertha, and Aunt Addie, and then there was one other sister born, Aunt Nina. But their first letter of their name was along with Elba Township.
Now, are these the aunts that lived in the Bailey estate?
That's correct.
Next door to the home you were
That I
born
was born in. That's
Mhm.
right. That was about a 500-acre farm. About 120 acres that was timberland and pasture land. The rest was tillable.
Mm-hmm.
Raised a lot of cattle, hogs. They even had their own ice house. They had a stream dammed up where they would cut the ice, store the ice, and they saw stuff. And that was their refrigeration. I think Helen mentioned they stored it in sawdust because
Why,
they heated the home with wood, had wood burning stoves or wood burning furnace and fireplaces.
why don't you mention the talent that some of them had?
Well,
Grandma was a photographer.
my Aunt Addie went to the school of art in Chicago and learned to paint, and Aunt Laura also did painting. They was I'd go in the summertime and go visit them. There was family by the name of Barrett's moved in where the farm home where I was born, and I played with one of the boys, Hubert Barrett. And then they had an old player piano that I loved to play. The player part set on they actually worked the keyboard. And then later on we inherited that. And then our home, after Millard had left home, none of it, Florence and I didn't play. We played that. And then later on, Robert got some of the roles, so they had quite a lifespan.
You're
A lot of them
forgetting
are
the-
old classical pieces.
You're forgetting your photographer in your family. You have pictures
Well, that's
from
right.
her,
Aunt
too.
Nina was a photographer and took a lot of pictures of families we grew up.
Yeah, and we've got some of those pictures too.
Okay.
Yeah. Mom, tell me about your grandparents.
Well, my grandparents came from England. I think they actually were Welsh, more than English, but they spoke with the H's off and the H's added on and dropped the H's. I was always Ellen to them. If I received a card in the mail from them, it was Miss Ellen Pullen instead of a Helen.
I mean, they physically dropped
Yes,
the
they
H.
Dropped the
physically
H.
dropped the
Oh,
H.
oh my gosh.
It was me arms and me hands, the way they talked. And I was only 8 when I lost Grandma Pullen. She again had a tragedy there. She wore long dresses, and long dresses weren't in style at that time, but she was about 1932 or 3, and she still wore them. And she wore them down to her shoes, and she was out raking up their yard in Prince Row where they lived. They just had 2 houses together, raking up some of the yards in April, and the wind come up, and Grandma had set fire to the leaves. And instead of her getting a neighbor man or somebody to help her, or calling the fire department, she didn't use her head. She got scared. She was afraid it was going to set the neighbor's garage on fire, and she got in there with her feet, shoes on, and her clothes, and started trying to stamp out the fire, and it got her on fire. And the neighbor man rescued her. He put the hose on the fire and her too, and they took her to the hospital in Peoria at that time. And as Kenny and I was walking home from school, from Elmwood to we were a mile and a half from the town. We were walking on the gravel road, and Dad met us with a car, and he said, "Mom's been burned." And I'm on my way, and we scared us. And we thought it was our mom, and we were on all the way home. And when we got home, it wasn't our mom, it was our grandmother. But it was his mom, and he didn't think to say grandma to us. But anyway, she lived 3 days and died of severe burns on her body.
This was your
Grandma
dad's,
Pullen.
your dad's
Yes,
mom.
my dad's mother.
And then the
Uh,
Stotlers.
Well, I'm just going to finish with the Pullens. Grandma always had her cookie jar loaded with cookies, and they were molasses cookies, so we always knew where to find them. She kept them there purposely. And she kept our banks. We came into Prince Royal once a week to get supplies, and our folks would give us some money, and sometimes Grandpa would give us some money out of his change and stuff. And our banks had money, all 4 of us, so much money was put in our banks each week. I think I managed to save about $7.50. It was put in the Prince Royal Bank, and I lost my money with the Depression years when the banks went closed. But Grandpa Pullen he had a mustache. He was a beautiful farmer, a real good farmer, and he went back to England, I think 3 times during his lifetime, which cost them money on the farm to let him go. And he lived there. My memories of him is he'd be sitting in a rocking chair in the front yard in the summertime. There was no air conditioning, and he'd have a fly swatter, and he'd be reading the paper. The neighbor kids come up and pester him, and he'd shake down his false teeth, and he'd say, "I've eaten bigger kids bigger than you." And he'd swat the flies, and that was some of his memories I have of him. And they would come up to our house, just like Jim's grandmother did, Grandma would ride the back seat and he'd ride the front. They had an old Model T that was a 1913 with a square fenders and the Ooga horn on it. And she'd be in the back seat because she was heavy set and there wasn't room for her in the front. So she'd ride in the back and he'd ride in the front. And as a kid, that always struck us funny because my mother always rode in the front seat with my dad. And in fact, I got to ride between them. So I had the three boys in the back. Grandma and Grandpa Stotler, my mother was one of 8 kids. They were quite a talented family. They didn't have the money, my mother didn't, to go on to high school, but she loved school, so she took another year of grade school. She just went back and went to school and helped the teachers. She wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. And for her to go on to school, she would have had to ride a horse, and she'd had to have better clothes than she had, and she said, I just gave it up. But Uncle Ernest went on to high school, and he rode the horse, and he was the only one of the family that graduated out of Bradley College. And he became a teacher in Akron, Ohio for years. Of the 8, Mother had 2 sisters and 5 brothers. And they all lived to be up in years. Before they passed away.
What did Uncle Ernest study at Bradley?
Uncle Ernest was, I need some help, Jim. He was
Industrial arts.
Industrial arts. He was taught manual training, which was be woodworking, wasn't it? That'd be woodworking? I think it was.
Yeah,
He was
yeah,
quite...
mostly.
The table that I have over at our house that you refinished not too long ago, Dad has taken it. He's got it sitting with one of his speakers on it in the basement now. He made and gave to Grandma Poland,
Oh, yeah.
or Grandma Stotler, I'm sorry. That was his mother when he was in manual training.
Okay.
And he was quite a photographer too. He's taken was one of his hobbies. Traveling was another.
I do remember meeting him and talking to him about
Yes, I think
that
we did.
particular camera that's over
Yes.
there was one that I took pictures in high school, and I remember he was telling me that I should put it in a glass case and preserve it.
The Stotler family were very talented family. They did something with whatever education they had. I mean, they were just that kind. And it was my mother. Now, my dad wasn't dumb at all. Dad might just go back just a minute here. Grandma and Grandpa Pullen wanted my dad to attend Jubilee College. And Jubilee College at that time was a boys' school, which is near Peoria here. And Dad didn't want to go. So he became a farmer, which was very common for the fellows on the farm. He was already trained and taught by his dad, so that's what they became. But the Stotlers, 2 of them became workers of the Bell Telephone Company, and Uncle Ernest and Uncle Harry both. And Uncle Fred was a farmer. I think Uncle Charlie was a farmer. He also sold real estate. He was up in South Dakota.
Which one was in Denver?
That was Uncle Everett.
Uncle Everett. And that was one of your...
It was one of my own uncles, yes.
Yeah.
my mom's
He went on
brothers.
to work with AT&T. In fact, he had a lot to do with laying the cables across the ocean and going up to Alaska, and then later years installing the microwave towers that
Up in the mountains.
was for long distance. So he said all the time he worked for AT&T, he spent a lot of time just going back to school learning a new technology. So he always enjoyed that kind of
They
work.
never, what I was trying to bring out, they never let education stop them. You wouldn't have known it. Uncle Harry wanted a job, and Uncle Ernest had been, not Uncle Ernest, Uncle Everett had been interviewed for the job, and he'd already got on at AT&T, and so Uncle Harry went to the Peoria office here and told him that he was qualified also. He had high school, I might add. He would, by the time that he and Uncle Everett both did. I'm wrong there. I said only Uncle Ernest. Uncle Ernest was the only college graduate. But he went and he got the job pretending to be his brother on his credentials and got the job and later proved himself to be a worker. I can't remember, but I believe he was in the office part of the time. I think
Dad,
he
was any of your relatives, did any of them attend Jubilee College?
My grandfather Ware did. He didn't finish there, but that was when the school was. See, that was
That was back in the 1800s, late 18. No, that'd be in the early.
that was like a
1900s.
junior college would be today. It wouldn't be
Yeah,
a 4-year
2 years.
college. And that was sponsored by a church. Now I'm trying to think what it was, Evangelical, I believe. And I don't remember just how long it functioned, but that was kind of rare to have a college just out in the country, like, you know.
I believe it started up for about 4 years, and then it went defunct, and then it restarted.
Yes.
And then it
Yes,
quit.
Yes.
I think it was out in the country and farmer children.
And
I'd like to add that my own mother, due to the fact that she did not get a high school education, kept herself up when I was in high school and when my brothers all were quite interested in a lot of the subjects that we were doing. And we didn't need help because we had no problem with school, none of us. But Mom was insistent that my brothers go on to college when they had the opportunity. And my dad would have kept them home on the farm. And Mother went out and picked the corn and helped out to be sure they went to school. And Dad would want to pull them out of high school for help on the farm, and she wouldn't let him. She encouraged him to go on.
do you want to talk about one of the results from that, Roscoe?
Well, Roscoe became a doctor, which he had 4 years of college and 4 years of medical school and residency, and then later went on to Duke University and got a, I don't know what you call it, just extra education in endocrinology.
He went on to Duke to specialize in endocrinology, and Roscoe became, he went down to, after he served his internship in Chicago, after going to Northwestern, went down to New Orleans and went into administrative work, and also taught in some of the colleges down in some classes, and taught in some of the military camps. So he went into administrative work, and I guess one of his outstanding achievements was he was head of the medical school, and they built a new school in Columbia, Missouri.
Might
In fact, he
add,
published several books on diagnosing and so forth in the field of medicine.
I might add that my brothers all were going to school under the administration of the Roosevelt administration, which I'm not positive because they're so much older than I am. I never went to college. I went to Brown's Business School, but I think your dad could help here. I think you were given money for tuition. Is that what it was?
We was given help through, they call it FERA. It was a fund to help students to go on to college that they thought had the ability to go on. So even though there wasn't a good time financially in the country, there was help for students that didn't have the money to go.
Roscoe was a very outstanding student. He was way above average in intelligence. And a Dr. Wolf that he stayed with, and by the way, he lived in the basement. He had a room upstairs that was unheated and did his studying down by the coal furnace. I want to bring this up because it meant so much to him to go to school that he never stopped as far as ever working was concerned, and he worked his way through Knox College. He worked in the women's dormitory for his food, and he worked for Dr. Wolf for his board, and then Dr. Wolf would often help him, let him use his car for dates and stuff. They were good to him.
Did he use student loans, or how do you know if that
He
was
pretty
part
much
of that?
did, yeah, what he could get. And then his sophomore year, he was a real good athlete. We haven't mentioned that. He was a track runner. And even in high school, and he was such a good athlete and such an all-around scholar. He won a scholarship with a Hunter Trophy to Knox College, and his sophomore year he got to stay in the dorm, free, and just for his honors and his stuff he done for the college. So then when he wanted to be a dentist, or Dr. Wolf wanted him to be a dentist, he said, Dr. Wolf, if you'll loan me the money, I'd like to be a doctor.
I'm out of battery.
No battery.
We
Okay.
can stop and change. Mom, I'd like to have you talk about Uncle Robert a little bit.
All right, Uncle Robert was Roscoe's shadow. Roscoe led and Robert tried to keep up, and it was a little hard for him to do through the years. He idolized him, but Roscoe really, he was gone more from him than he was with him because both boys were in different schools from time to time. Robert did follow him to college over to Knox after he took a year out and stayed home on the farm with Dad for a year. I don't know why anymore, but mostly I suppose because of money. And Roscoe was able to get him started in the Knox. But before that, Robert was the big brother between to Kenny and I. He was real good to us when we had this mill and played in it with the toys. And he'd go, if he had any money at all, every once in a while he'd bring us in a new car or something. They all kind of enjoyed that, seeing the way we used to play. And we didn't have money in our pockets to run to town and buy toys, and my folks didn't either. And we, as I told you, we made a lot of our stuff out of wood also, and cigar boxes and different stuff. And Robert was always there to be the car driver, very kind sort of a guy. And when he went to Knox, he had a $3 bicycle, and I didn't have one, and I'd learned to ride a bike off from my cousin Charlie Hicks, who lived in Elmwood, loaned me his. And Mary and I took it up to the Elmwood Cemetery, and I taught Mary how to ride it. That was my pal. And I already knew how. I'd rode it out there. And I broke the chain on the bicycle, and I was so scared about it. And it was Charlie's bike, and Uncle John says, "Don't worry about it. We often put new chains on." So, but anyway, he got me a bicycle. He gave me the bike from college. He'd been riding, and my dad fixed it all up, and Dad and I both rode it. We kept it on the front porch. This was when I was in high.
So Uncle Robert got you this?
Yeah, he got me the bike. Well, he gave it to me. It was his.
What kind was it, Mom? Do you remember?
Oh no, just a balloon old bike. Dad put new tires and stuff on it. I don't know why my folks never got us a bike, because we lived on the hard road then, and I was in high school where I could have rode it. But after we had that, that's the only bike I had until I bought my Schwinn after we were married, when you were in on it, Larry.
Oh, that's quite a while
many
later.
years ago. I gave that bicycle to the Shuck boy, and he rode it a while. But I didn't ride it in Peoria when I left and came to town. I got rid of the bicycle. What I remember mostly about Robert, he was a lot of things he was interested in. He was the one that helped bring the first radio into the house. He liked cars real well. He learned to drive Uncle Walt Pullen, my dad's brother, had a coupe that had the rumble seat in it and so forth, and was new. And Robert was so small, and he learned to drive it. He managed it. He was always a small one of the family. And he didn't get his height. He got more height as he got a little older, but he still isn't a big man today. And Robert became more of a pal after he and your dad were boyfriends in Knox College. That we got more chumming around with them than through the years we got older. But mostly, as I said, I chummed with a lot of girlfriends. And when I got into high school, I had my own friends there, and I didn't have my brothers with me. Kenny went to the senior year with me, and then we rode the school bus. Then when I got ready to start high school, we had a school bus. And freshman year, I rode it 2 years. And anybody who was too close to high school, they had to walk. That was a mile. So, but I got to ride it 2 years.
What are the age differences between you and your brothers?
Well, Robert is as much older to me as your dad. Your dad was 82 in December, or November, and he will be 82 in February.
So there's 6 years.
So there's 6 years between, and during the years you grow up, he did play games with us, especially in high school. By that time we had a little more in common, but before that, he was always out. Dad got a Fordson tractor, and he was on it, driving it, and Dad had him working in the fields. And as Kenny got older, he took Kenny too and put him in the fields. But then Robert was an instigator of, I think he was the instigator of my dad getting our first John Deere and last and only tractor. They got rid of the old Fordson then and got it. And Dad will have to add you a little more on that, because I think he knows more about the tractors than I do. But I did drive the tractor. I was a tomboy. I drove it on the binder for my dad. But I didn't run out and get in the fields. I had plenty to do at home with the chickens in the yard and the animals. I loved the animals.
You had a dog too, didn't you?
Oh, I had a dog. We all did. It was a family dog.
The name of the dog was Shep?
Was Shep, and he was given to me by a friend in Elmwood, the Clinch family.
Now, what years did you have your dog? Do you remember?
Oh, I got my dog when I was probably 7, and had him until I was in high school, and he got hit by a car on the hard road there where we lived. We lived on 150. It happened one night when we'd gone to Elmwood. We went to Elmwood every Saturday night, and come back, we couldn't find our dog, and Dad found him the next day. He'd been hit by a car. But somebody, or else he had, hauled himself to the ditch where he died. That was a family tragedy. Any dog you lost was.
Mhm.
But he was quite a dog. He climbed up the ladders, the ladder of the hay loader. It would roll the hay up into the stack on the rack, and the dog, in order to get up on the hay to ride in, he'd climb up that thing. That was his ladder, and up he'd come, and he'd ride in with the boys and the big load of hay. He was always out in the field with them. He rounded up the cattle. He's real good about it, except he'd swing on their tails. My dad never liked that. They didn't move. Well, he moved them. But he never really hurt them that bad. We had one old cow called Butt, and he'd give her a bad time, but she'd butt at him. That was why we named her that.
Oh, okay.
She'd lower her head when she was bunt. So,
What's your age difference between you and Uncle Kenny then?
2.5 years between
Okay.
Kenny and
So he was your buddy
I.
growing
See, he
up.
was my buddy, yes.
Mhm. You did everything with Uncle Kenny.
Pretty
and-
much on the farm, yeah.
Mhm.
I rode horseback with farmer girls. I rode horseback with Frances Pacey at Brimfield. She was real heavy, and we'd pull the horses up to the fence post to get up on the horses. And I had a saddle, and she didn't, and she'd get up on the fence and try to get on the horse, and she'd get the giggles. And Frances is dead now, but I had more laughs with her over that. We just rode old farm horses. They weren't riding horses.
Mhm.
So Dad didn't keep, I don't know why he didn't get us a riding horse, but he just didn't think about it, I guess. Well, they didn't have a lot of money.
Well, you had a two-purpose horse, a work and a riding horse.
That's right. Except we weren't allowed to ride them when he was working them because they were too tired.
Was there anything special that that your dad liked to do on his time off, like in town? Did he like to go to town?
Oh,
or do-
yes, he loved to go.
And what did he do in town?
He'd go to the coffee shop and gab. He'd
Oh.
get another farmer to talk to him over a cup of coffee.
Oh, okay.
I think Jim's dad did some of that too. That was
What-
typical farmers.
What did your dad do? Do you remember? Recall?
Oh,
what
things he liked to do?
Yeah.
Well, in the summertime, if there was a fair around the horse races, he was there. He loved to go to fair. In fact, the last fair I remember going to was down to the state fair at
We
Springfield.
took it, you and I.
And we went to see the horse races. And he liked exhibits too, but that was something and we never missed a homecoming. We went to homecomings all around the community, probably at least a half a dozen towns.
Oh, well, we did
And
that.
that was part of our recreation.
I can see that in Aunt Florence's pictures that she had carried out with her too. That
That's
they went
right,
to a lot
that's
of
right.
the homecoming parades.
I'd like to add that your dad has told me this over the years. He just doesn't think about this on the spur of the moment, but Dad Ware smoked cigars.
Mhm.
And he made sure he was out of cigars about every other day, so he had an excuse to go to town. He told that. So,
That's just hearsay. But
so
no,
he
that's
would go up to
true.
Yates quite often.
I remember days. Well, Dad done his work first. That was important to him. But I
Oh,
remember
this would be rainy
be
days.
a
and
rainy
stuff.
day, and we couldn't get out. It had rained the day before, and couldn't get out in the fields. Invariably, Dad would find an excuse, and usually that was one excuse. He didn't have any cigars.
What were the Depression years like for your families
Well,
growing up?
We had plenty to eat, but like Calvin was saying, we didn't have much money because there wasn't much money around. But we was very fortunate that we didn't lose the farm we were on, and we did have plenty to eat, but you didn't get much for anything. Corn was 12 cents a bushel. You could buy 3 pounds of hamburger for about 50 cents. We didn't buy much hamburger because we raised our livestock and butchered beef and butchered 3 hogs, had chickens, and we raised putting all the vegetables we need. About all we bought at the grocery store was the staples like flour, sugar, and things like spices, things like that. So we was fairly self-sufficient. In fact, a lot of, like I was telling Grandmother Ware, which was earlier than that, did a lot of sewing, and then Mother did some sewing. So we was fairly self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm. So it didn't affect your family very adversely then?
No, we didn't have to form any get any bread lines or what unemployed. We just didn't have very much money, but we didn't lose the farm, or we didn't have any real hardship.
How did your dad buy equipment that you used? Were you in debt at all, or did you have it all paid
Dad
for?
was a believer of buy it Well, he had to go in debt a time or two, but for the most part, he tried to save enough money so he could buy something for cash. When he first started farming, especially at Nina's, that was a big farm. He had to go in debt, and that didn't work out for some reason. I wasn't old enough to know what. But then when he had to go down to George Matthews, he had to borrow money. But Dad was more of pay for it, save the money and pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And he bought some used machinery and things. But I tell you, the thing that was a big expense was like he farmed with horses until about 1926. A farm horse was a pretty expensive item.
Hmm.
Dad didn't he raised horses when he was just a young man, but the time I knew him, he always bought the horse to replace.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Mom? How did the Depression affect your family?
Didn't affect us too much. The same thing with Dad because we had our own food, but we run a milk route in Elmwood. My dad started that up. He was always I told you he was outgoing on that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he got the notion, he got some milk bottles, and we had what we called a milk cooler. The water from the well was inside of it, and the milk would come down the outside of the cooler and run into the bottles. That's the way they bottled it. And this cooled the milk down from the cows, and he would deliver milk into town twice a day. And I helped deliver the milk. I was about 11 then. And we sold a quart of milk for 9 cents, and we sold a pint of cream or half pint of cream for a quarter. And they made enough money from that to buy the little staples and stuff they needed. And Mother had eggs and chickens, and the chickens about once a year she would clean them out, and they were sold what we didn't need for the next year she'd get rid of and sell them at the markets. And of course the pigs went in. But during the years of the Depression, when I was in grade school in Elmwood, my dad's pigs got cholera. That was going around with the livestock at that time, just like it does now sometimes. And I think Dad had to kill some of his pigs. I think they got rid of a bunch of them, and then had to start over. So that put them back. My folks, your grandfather Ware was able to live on Rowley farms, and my dad wasn't. My grandfather, going back and forth so much to England, he could have owned a farm, took the money that he made in the years when you could buy the land cheap, and he lived on good farm, but he stayed on the same farm. And my dad started out on it, but it was sold, and he didn't have the money to buy it, so that made him what I call the tenant farmer, where I explained a while ago.
Did he always farm tenant?
Yes, he did, because he never, with 4 children and trying to raise them and so forth, why they didn't get rich from it.
Mm-hmm.
I might add, you were asking about the farm machinery. That's what they would go to sales for too, Larry, where the farmers would sell out and some of them retire, and I'm sure Dad Ware did that too. And if they needed something, they would go there and try to get it used, which my dad often did if something wore out. Of course, they repaired them. They spent their winter months in the machine sheds trying to repair and get things ready for the next year too. So.
Did you have something to add, Dad? Oh,
That's
I thought you were gonna.
That's okay.
Okay. Well, I'd like to have you talk about after you graduated from high school, Mom. You went to Brown's Business College? Was that quite a bit after? Or?
Well, no, I went right into Brown's Business College that fall. But I might tell you that the grandfathers and grandmothers, by this time we'd lost them. We lost Grandpa Pullen in the year that we moved to the Brimfield farm east of Peoria, east of Brimfield, I'm sorry. And Mother had inherited her parents' house was sold to Aunt Nell there, where Celia Hicks lives today, in Elmwood. It's still in the family. And Aunt Nell and Uncle John bought that for $800. Now that was a big house, if you remember back, as you were a kid.
You know what street that house was on in Elmwood? I've always tried to go back and find it, and I cannot find that house.
Well, that house is just down below the hill, Hope, you know where it is, from the nursing home there. It's right down, straight down.
We'll take a ride out
She
there.
could take it right to you. I can show you too where it is.
We'll take a
I
ride
wouldn't
out
know the name of the street anymore. I guess I do with Celia, but she still goes by a post office number. But what I wanted to say is the house was sold. Mother got her share of $100 of the 8 kids. And she loaned me the money to go to Brown's on. So I started out in Browns with $100. That's all I had, and I rode back and forth with Robert free
I see.
from the farm.
From
Never-
Brimfield
And-
to.
and-
You never paid him back?
No, I never paid him.
How
And-
expensive was tuition? Do you remember?
It cost me about $300 to $400 to go through Browns. But what I done, I was a good student. I was already had the commercial subjects in high school because that's what I intended to do. It didn't take me long to get through some of my subjects, and I borrowed the rest of the money from Brown's Business College and went on through and got my diploma. Then I paid them back after I got a job. It took me all of the first year to pay back Mom and pay them back. Later, I gave her back $100 because she didn't have that kind of money either.
No doubt.
In the meantime, my folks had moved from Peoria, from Brimfield. We'd had a farm sale, and they'd moved to Peoria,
To New York Avenue.
to New York Avenue.
But you never paid Robert back.
Robert he was hauling riders, and he was working in Peoria before he was married. And he had 6, 7 of us riding in the car, and Kenny sat on a stool in the back at my feet. So he had a carload. And so he had 4 paying riders and Kenny and I. Well, he didn't count himself. But he and Florence got married in January of that year, so he came to Peoria. So then I had to get a ride with somebody else because my folks didn't give up the farm until March.
So what year are we talking about? You graduated from high school
1939.
in 39. You went to
And-
the Browns until 41.
No, till 40.
Till
Till
40.
1940, I graduated.
Okay.
See, I took the stenographic course, which was a 9-month course.
Oh, I see. I see.
And so I started working for the light company in May, I guess, in May of 1940.
Okay, now we gotta back up a little bit and get Dad's history here. You went to Knox College for a short time.
I went for 1 semester and 6 weeks. I got the measles while I was there, and with complications, I never went back.
And you were studying to be.
Well, I was taking what you call a special course. I was going to go 2 years to Knox and finish up down at the U of I in engineering, but I didn't get that job done.
And you were interested in electrical engineering.
That's right.
Particularly.
That's right.
At Knox College, you met somebody who his little sister was going to change the
Right.
course of events in your life.
Yes, I room and boarded with the county superintendent, Walter F. Boyce, and as a little side interest, he also had been a teacher at Yates City High School and taught there when my dad went to high school, and and some of his sisters. So he was well known to the family. He'd been the county superintendent for 37 years, and he found out that I wanted to go to Knox, and took me in as well as Robert, and that's where I met Robert Pullen, and that's how I met my wife here, Helen. So it wasn't all lost.
I'd like to add to that, my brother Roscoe, one of his jobs at Knox was to get jobs for the freshmen so that they could come to school, and he put Robert over with your dad at Dr. Boyce, is that his name? Boyce?
Well, he worked what they called as a business agent. And that's right, he would find job for students that needed some extra help. In fact, Robert worked in that business office the 2 years that he went to Knox to earn a little extra money to pay toward his tuition.
Roscoe was still in college when Robert and Dad started.
I worked what they called FERA. I had about 6 hours. I'd work a week, different jobs around the college to help pay on my tuition as well as scholarship.
As a part of that was a Roosevelt plan.
That's correct. That was the
Some of
FERA.
his administration. What year did you go to Knox College? What year?
I started in the fall of 34.
So you graduated from high school
In 33, I laid out a year.
He and Robert.
We didn't have much money. It was one of the barbers in Gage City. They called him Bill the Barber. That got me interested in going to Knox College. He had gone there some too, but he didn't graduate either. But a lot of students started, didn't have the money to go on. Yeah.
That was pretty common.
I was
back
trying to
then.
work room board, FERA.
Pretty heavy
I'd
load
taken
for
a
them,
pretty heavy course, and I
trying
didn't
to
figure
study college.
that I could swing it all. That's one reason I didn't go back.
I'd like to add here, since we're talking about my family a little bit in college, Uncle Roscoe was valedictorian of his high school class. I told you he was an exceptional student. and he was also a good track runner, very good athlete. He also did jumping hurdles and some other stuff. In all my lifetime, I never saw the man run. My folks never took us in to see a track race. And I wasn't very old. I mean, you know, so I wasn't that much interested. But the coach of Elmwood started Roscoe on $100 to go to school.
Mm.
That's how he got to go.
So
So
the-
these were the middle of the Depression years. I mean, my folks just didn't have it, and that was it.
So prerequisite to going to college was $100.
Well, it was a start anyway.
Well, I'll tell you what it cost. The tuition at Knox College then was $135 a semester.
Hmm.
Compare that with today.
You wouldn't even get
And
a.
of course, you had
about
your
two-
books.
That
Had-
would buy 2 books
You
today.
had the books to pay for. You had activities fee, things like that. But just think, $135 a semester. That wouldn't even get you in the door.
No, no.
Nope.
Both Roscoe and Robert in college had it a little harder. They had to do more studying than Roscoe did. He could read a book through once and on a chapter, and he had it. My brothers had to, the rest of them had to study. We all did. School didn't come that easy for us. It wasn't hard, but anyway, this with the struggle of which your dad just mentioned for him too, to try to do all this was it took an outstanding student to finally be able to finish it, or else have some parents that could give him a little cash. And so Roscoe first was at Dr. Wolf's. Then Robert was at Dr. Wolf's after your dad lost his place to stay. This Dr. Boyes, did he die?
No, his health failed.
Okay. He had to give up his students anyway. And Roscoe went over to Robert went over to Dr. Wolf's. And then Kenny, as the years went by, he stayed there. So they had all 3 of my brothers. And Dr. Wolf loaned the money along with his sister-in-law for Roscoe and helped put him through 4 years of medical school. You just about had to go straight through on that stuff, and if you didn't, you would forget. And David, of course, went through college the same way. I mean, that's the way you do.
So, Dad, as a result of knowing Uncle Robert, then you came to the Pullen farm,
That's right.
and you met Mom. How old was Mom, and how old were you?
She
when
was
you-
in grade school. I had no intention of dating her.
Not exactly-
6 years, almost 6 years. 5 years.
I
and
was
about 9
finishing up
months.
the 8th grade, Dad.
Well, she was still in grade
I was
school.
13.
And, you know, it's just a kid's sister.
And
Well,
what'd you think of her?
Just a kid growing up. You know, I thought I'd wait
The
till I
feeling was
grow up, but
mutual,
she
huh?
never grew up, so I married her anyway. No, I didn't start dating Helen until, oh my gosh.
Oh,
Okay, I know when it was.
we had a pickup date when I was a
We
junior.
went on picnics together as a family. See, Robert and Florence were married a year ahead, a little over a year ahead, a year and a half ahead of us. And we had visited back and forth with all the Pullen family. Pullen family, Ware family hit it off great. And but I didn't actually start dating Helen until she was about ready to graduate from high school in 1939.
Mhm.
That's all.
He
that
took me
happened.
to Starved Rock once.
Hadn't been for that.
Oh, did he?
Hadn't been for that, you might have had somebody else for a dad and mom.
And did anybody make a friendly suggestion you might want to date her? Like, did Robert or your folks or?
Nope.
Oh, yes, they did. Your mother did. Oh, yes, you've
Your-
forgotten
Your
that.
mom, Dad?
His mom.
I can't
yes.
remember that. No, it was more my idea than anybody else's. No, Helen's a real attractive girl. A lot of fun.
Mhm. So you dated her from 19 about when?
39
Do
to
you remember-
41.
What did you do on dates? Or court?
Do I
you
have to
called
answer
it-
that question?
But you called it courting back then.
That's correct.
You didn't call it dating.
Well, yes, dating or courting.
They did call it dating.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, I guess a lot of things. We went to some dances, went to movies together, and
Went on a
some
boat
fa-
ride?
Yeah, went on a boat ride up the Illinois River, one of them old paddle wheel boats.
Went to
We had a lot of
homecomings.
good times, really did.
Went to homecomings, family
Oh, yeah.
reunions,
Oh, it sounds like you had a.
family picnics.
Oh, yeah.
Did you take her back up to Starved Rock?
You was
Oh,
up
yeah.
Starved Rock, sure were.
Now,
Not
was
as
it-
many times as you have.
Yeah.
What was the name of the paddle boat? Was that the Columbia that later?
No,
Right?
You know, I
No,
don't
that's-
recall.
That would have
That-
been
Now,
before.
that-
these boats, it wasn't.
They were dancing boats. They were. I don't remember
had
we was here all the
music,
time
they
or
had
not. I
entertainment.
think it was. We went on that after we were engaged.
She was still dating.
We were engaged.
But they didn't have a Julia Bell swing, but they had just a boat that would come touring up the Illinois River, and you could buy a ticket.
He
and
had
spend
one
the
of his friends he met on the boat, and this is just going to be some family fun here, but one of his friends met on the boat, and he was drunk, and he says, "Hello there, Mr. Underwear."
evening. Well, there was drinks served on the boat if you wanted to imbibe.
I laughed over that.
What kind of car were you driving at the time?
Well, I bought a 35 Ford. In fact, I bought that almost a year before I started working in Peoria.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, we had that a good number of years because the war came along. You couldn't buy it. There wasn't any cars made, any new cars made, after the Pearl Harbor in December of '41. So we were glad. In fact, we had gasoline rationing, and you was limited on how much you could drive.
Mm-hmm.
So we had that from 1938 till 1947,
Yeah, that sounds right.
9 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a 4-year-old car when I bought it. So we got the good out of that.
Well, the first car that he had to start dating me was his dad's.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh,
it
that's
was a
right.
36 Plymouth.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But he was taking the car away from his folks, and that's when he
I decided I
got
need
busy and bought his Ford.
my own transportation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you came into Peoria quite a bit on your dates.
Well, he first started dating me out
She
on
was
the
in-
farm.
She
See,
was
this
she
was
still living
the
in Brimfield.
he
No,
started
I
dating
mean,
me.
I mean, when you would pick her, after you would pick her up at Brimfield, you'd go into Peoria.
Not
and-
necessarily.
No.
Elmwood, Farmington.
Okay.
Where were we taking those? Yeah, we'd go to
wherever.
Peoria.
Yeah, some.
We'd go to Peoria to
Mhm,
shows.
mhm.
Was there a favorite restaurant you guys used to eat at?
Can't remember
Hunt's? Was it? Would you eat at Hunt's some?
Not too much. Steak and Shake maybe was pretty much more than. We also liked the Sugar Bowl on Main Street.
Oh yes.
that. There was a nice restaurant on
Mhm.
right on Main Street, on the foot of the hill.
Mm-hmm.
We really didn't eat out too much, Larry. Dad didn't make that kind of money, and I wasn't rich, and I wasn't working yet. I was in school.
What, you weren't working at R.G. Letourneau yet?
I
No, he
started
was
at
helping on the
Letourneau's.
farm.
July the 20th, 1940.
Oh.
And I moved to Peoria. I didn't think I wanted
So
to
he
drive
had
back and
dated me
forth
almost a year.
60
before I
miles a
came in.
day. And I roomed with Robert and Florence. They lived in a apartment. It's all the second floor, a little house up on North Madison Street. And
And
I
he
slept on an
a
army
cot
cot
in their kitchen. Hot.
in the kitchen. Had a lot of fun with them. They hadn't been married very long either.
In the meantime, that year, we had moved in from the farm to Peoria on New York Avenue, where my folks had an apartment upstairs, a nice one.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what was paying their payments on the house.
I see.
And so when that became vacant, Robert and Florence moved up there and brought Jim. And I'm telling you, Larry, in those days, that was kind of a letdown to Dad and I, because I was dating him. Have him living in the same house.
Oh.
Well, like I want to put
No,
this
we were
like
conscientious about
President
that,
Nixon
very
used
much.
to put it. I want to make this very clear. I didn't move in, I moved up. I lived in the apartment upstairs. And talk about a live house.
Oh, it was.
All
I'll
those
tell
people
you.
living in there, and I think they was Bob
Zelda
Knight
was
that
dating
roomed there
Kenny. She
downstairs,
was my
slept
buddy.
in the same room with Kenny. And I tell you,
Oh,
when
yeah, Bob
everybody
Knight
got home,
come in.
that was a live house.
I
Oh,
bet
yep.
it was. I bet it was.
Gerald was a baby. Well, he was
Yeah.
2.
Oh, we got so many pleasant memories.
How did you two, if I'm Russian, let me know. How did you two become engaged?
Kind of matter of factly, I guess.
Well, I think I dated Helen for, let's see, from 39 till, well, I think it was in the spring. I proposed to Helen. I think I was sitting in the car, and we were sitting in the
I
back.
think you proposed to me 3 times.
I only remember one. That was the only one that counted.
That's the story I heard.
That was the first time. I kept telling him yes.
I didn't even give her a ring on the start, so I had it.
Well,
So
you
I
didn't
went
get the
down to
ring till the
Kay's
next,
Jewelry.
delay.
Well, I did borrow the money for that.
We were engaged
And paid
at
for it
Christmas time of
on
that year,
I believe it was
Jim.
on a weekly basis.
We were engaged at Christmas time of that year.
Yeah.
I didn't get the ring till April. Guess who got to see the diamond first? Uncle Kenny.
Uncle Kenny.
He was upstairs
you're
talking
good
to your
buddy.
dad, and Dad showed it to him, and I got angry over
Does
that.
he's
I
off
didn't think
before
that
she
was
did.
fair. Downstairs says, I saw your diamond.
Oh,
Being a bunch of young people, you know, We had Jim upstairs and Robert and Florence were just full of it in those days, and they were just newly married. And then having Bob Knight stay with. This is how Mom and Dad made some money to try to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Bob wanted to stay with us, and he was a brother of one of my girlfriends in Elmwood or Brimfield. So Bob is. In the meantime, I'll have to tell some more. He tried to date me. I was sitting out on the porch swing with Dad one night, and he come out and wanted me to go for a boat ride up the Illinois River with him. And Dad got jealous.
Well, we were already engaged. I said to Bob, I says, Helen's already spoke for her. I said, we're engaged. I said,
I think that's about the only time he ever
told
got
him he can take a
jealous.
walk.
I still laugh over that.
Yeah.
Bob was a good guy.
Oh, heck of a nice guy.
He was just pretty much like a brother to me. You've been the boyfriend. He was a brother of Jean, and I chummed with her from freshman in high school on, and I spent a lot of my time at the night home. So I was over there a lot. I'm the only one who had the car. I put all the teenagers in the car, and we were active in the Union Church there in Brimfield. That was funny.
This is a not related question, but we'll get back to it because once I flip the page, I'll miss this one. But Hope and I both wanted to know where Sam Hill was located.
I'll have to answer that because I think that expression came from my household. That was one of my dad's expressions. Sam Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I know my room looked a lot like it, so I was trying to find something that looked
Yeah.
a little bit
Well,
like.
another good expression from Dad, Paul, and if he couldn't come up with a person name,
Uscully.
it was always Uscully.
Uscully. And
So if you get stuck, just say Uscully.
after my folks had been killed and I was working in the store, the Uscully candy bar come out. And I told your dad then, I said so many times I would have loved to give him that candy bar. He would have got a laugh out of it.
Let's see. Well, I covered a lot of these questions. I guess we're up to your wedding. Tell us about your wedding. What it was like. Who was there. Where it was held.
I can tell you all that.
Okay.
Well, our wedding was held in the parsonage of the Hill Memorial Methodist Church, right up the corner of High and Main Street. And all we had was immediate relatives.
Mm-hmm.
Helen's parents and brothers.
Except Jerry. He was 4.
That's right.
Neighborly
And that's
came
right.
in, we didn't take it.
And my parents and sisters and brother-in-laws.
And wonderful
Robert
Paul
and
Lightfoot. Paul Lightfoot and Aunt Zelda, they were a lot of help.
Oh, I bet they were.
Oh, they were, both of them.
And this was on August 28th,
29th.
29th, 1941.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I want to get that right. And this is your wedding picture that we have here in the background.
Reverend Menzie performed the ceremony, and it was a nice ceremony, even though it was.
And was
There
it in the
wasn't as many
parsonage or
large
was it
weddings.
It's in
church?
the parsonage, but it was a big parsonage. I think the house is still standing.
It is.
It was a chop suey house for years. Had about 4 or 5 big bedrooms and a beautiful fireplace. We were married in the living room.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Menzie attended. She was our witness.
I guess that's
Robert
why.
and Florence stood up with us.
I guess that's why these very, very expensive weddings almost flabbergast me, because I think the little simple weddings were just as sacred and meant just as much, and as maybe I'm not against the real nice wedding because they are the big expensive wedding, but it was out of the question for us.
Oh,
But
yeah.
and then I might tell you that Mother Paulin had prepared a meal, and we all ate at their house after the wedding.
And Florence baked us a 3-tier wedding cake.
That's right.
What else did you have at the dinner? Do you remember?
Ham. She fixed ham. She had it all ready to go, Hope, so when she was in the oven while we were getting married.
Well,
We got married about 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and in those days the stores downtown were open. This was on a Saturday night, I guess it was. On a Saturday night we got married. And we went down with Robert and Florence to the studio to get this picture taken. That's where we were while Mom and Florence was getting the meal on the table. And in the meantime, Zelda found my suitcase packed for our honeymoon and got into it with Paul's help. He sewed my nightgown with great big stitches, sewed it shut. They threw in about a half a wastepaper basket full of rice in there, and they tied my hose in knots.
They really did a number on you.
And in those days, we didn't wear slacks, we wore dresses. They didn't do any damage to the hose, but they could have, because nylons just after the war, or just before the war, were a little hard to find.
That's what they made on
Yeah.
parachutes.
And,
Made parachutes on that.
I didn't get a white dress. I could have easily have had it because I was, those days you were considered pure and I was a virgin. But I had a blue dress with blue shoes and a blue hat. Hats were all to go. And I paid $6 or $8 for the dress.
Where'd you get it?
I got it downtown. I think it came from Montgomery Ward or J.C. Penney's. I don't know which.
Mm-hmm.
My mother went down with me to get it. And I wore that dress till I wore it out. And that was my idea, having something to wear after we were married. He didn't want me working anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just quit the job at the light company. So I had a good wardrobe of good clothes.
Mm-hmm.
I had worked there for a year.
After your wedding, where did you go on your honeymoon?
Went up to Chicago. We stayed overnight at a hotel in Kankakee, Illinois, and went on up and stayed at a hotel where Roscoe had worked when he was going to school at Northwestern.
Wabash Avenue, I think.
And so we took in just some of the sights. In fact, we only had Labor Day weekend for our honeymoon.
Oh, we were married on Saturday night, so we just had Sunday and Monday.
That's right.
He had to be back.
And you bought something that's sitting behind you there on your honeymoon.
Yeah, that was,
Saturday
it
afternoon.
wasn't Radio Shack. I can't think of the name of it.
Allied?
Allied Radio. In fact, I had bought some things from Allied Radio because I had taken the radio course, correspondence course, and done part of it. And they used to order stuff from them. So we went up there on West Jackson Street
It's the only radio
and
we had
bought
for years.
that little table radio. And amazing enough, that thing still plays.
That's right. I had it working this morning.
Is that
I
right?
plugged it in, it still works.
I think I hear a little boy.
You hear a dog.
Is that the dog?
That's the dog.
On our honeymoon, as we left the house, I told you we had lots of help. We had 20 tin cans in the back of our car. That was Robert and Paul and Kenny and all of them. And Dad, he was smart. He put his suitcase in the car. He didn't take mine.
You didn't help her out, did you?
And there was no river bridges in those days except the Franklin Street
Oh.
and the Cedar Street.
Mhm.
So we had to go down on Franklin to get on the Franklin Street Bridge, which today has been replaced with the I-74. And Dad stopped down there on Franklin Street and cut the doggone cans loose and threw them in the junk pile. He didn't take them any further.
Now today you would have just taken them on down to Ehrlichman and had them
Yeah,
recycled.
I got
Probably would've.
a refund.
All in all, we had a nice wedding, and the reason we had all the family was that Mother Ware had commented to me as I was dating your dad, and after I was engaged to him, she says, I've never seen one of my kids married. Both Florence and Mildred come into Peoria and got married at the Arcadia a parsonage, and Paul did too, and so did Robert, and your dad and I stood up with Robert and Florence. We saw them married, and then they stood up with us. And due to the fact that we had plenty of friends, and we're just, family was so close, we were so close to all of them, that's why we did that. And I think Opal stood up with Aunt Zelda, because that was her sister, but I didn't have any sisters, so.
And you were at Aunt Zelda's wedding, weren't you?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, Uncle Kenny couldn't stay home. He was dating Aunt Florence, or dating Aunt Zelda, I mean, and he kept going out to Shucks every night. Mom said she couldn't keep him home after I left. So 3 weeks later, on September 24th, they were married. And they borrowed $50 from Mom and Dad to get married on. That's the way we did, though, Larry. During those years, even yet when you were small, we pitched in, all of us, on the meals. We bought the turkey together. Everybody give $1 toward it, and we just, that's the way the families were. We just, we had a lot of good times, but we didn't have a lot of money.
So after your honeymoon, where did you call home?
Well,
609 Prospect Road, an
first
apartment,
house was a apartment
609.
on the second floor.
right
a
across from
little
Glen
house
Oak Park.
and on Prospect, just across from Glen Oak Park. Beautiful spot. They used to have the cannas always blooming, but it wasn't a very nice apartment. So one of my friends down at the shop got talking about where I was living. He said, "Well, I know about a real nice apartment, furnished apartment, and it's on Moss Avenue." I said, "Oh, I don't know where to go to Moss Avenue." He said, "You ought to take a look at it." So we did. It was just east of University on Moss Avenue. It was, everything was furnished. Even had a heated garage. Can you believe that? And we lived there from, let me think now, about latter part of October until the next spring. But we wanted to get some of our household furniture. So we moved from there over on Fisher, just across from Jumers, just north of Jumers.
Oh.
It was Kramer's Drive-In at that time.
Mhm.
And we lived there
For another
from
winter.
spring until summer, but it wasn't very satisfactory. The couple that lived there had a lot of domestic problems, and so then we moved to an apartment. A friend of ours, Mr. and Mrs. Pitts, down on Morton Street. It was a half a house. They call it an apartment, but it was actually half a house. We had 6 rooms and a garage,
3 bedrooms and bath up and 3 rooms down.
and rented it for $37 and a half rent. I don't think you could buy a rent apartment today for that kind of money. And we lived there till I went in service.
Mhm.
I
The
might,
Pitches are the ones that own the famous Pitches sausage.
That's
oh, that's
correct.
where he worked.
Mhm.
I might add that one of the reasons also we left Prospect Road is every time your dad and I were gone with a car, we kept it in the back there, just inside their yard in the back off an alley. We'd see lights in our upstairs apartment. They were constantly up there snooping.
Oops.
And we'd find their cigarette butts on our stool.
Oops.
It was a landlady in his life.
But we didn't have much
got
privacy.
tired of that.
No.
We
No.
got tired of them snooping into our
Yeah,
affairs.
Yeah. We,
Because an apartment is supposed to be your own as long as you pay your rent.
Well, all we had to do to move
So we
then
can
was
stay
just
there.
load our bedding and our clothes and put it in the back of the car, and we moved.
No,
It's a little more complicated than that today.
we had bought one white cupboard that you had to be moved.
That's right.
Was put in Dad's truck because it was Dad had a coal truck.
Hmm.
So
then I'd like Dad to talk just a little bit about working at RG Laternal.
Well, I started working at Eternals in July 20th of 1940. One of my friends from school was one of them gave me a recommend, and I had worked in a seed house. Turned him in as a reference, so I didn't have much trouble getting a job there. I'd applied several different places, but I was happy to have a job there, and was happy it turned out the way it did, because RG was more than just an employer. He was also, I would say, had an influence on me accepting Christ. And I had not been a churchgoer during my youth much. I went to Sunday school some, but not regular attendance. So that had some influence on my life. So I started working in the machine shop. I had not had any blueprint reading or any training other than just what the experience you had on the farm running machinery. But RG always said, he says, I know you've hired a lot of fellows from the rural area. He says, I know they don't know much about manufacturing, but they know how to work.
Mm-hmm.
That was his idea. I might tell you that all the time that RG owned the plant, which was from 1940, so he started there in actually 35, but until 1955, we would have a shop meeting at least once a week, and if he had an evangelist, sometime they'd have a shop meeting every working day of the week, and that was on, we were paid our regular wage, and we could go, it was voluntary, where they went to shop meetings, and I enjoyed going to them, because a lot of them were very interesting speakers. There was missionaries, and anybody that wanted to go into to further the religious education, RG would help pay for it. And if you wanted to take a correspondence course with the International Business School, he would pay for that. So it was a good place to work. I had worked a lot of different kind of machines in machine shop. Got a lot of good experience, but I really, for the most part, liked working at the Eternals.
Talk to me a little bit about what RG built at that time and what you did specifically at the
Okay,
plant.
well, I started out more or less in the drill department, and you didn't have any one assigned machine when I first started. You just kind of worked around whatever machine was open, and they had a fellow that was a setup man named Harley Thrush. He'd set up and you just run the machines. And I worked on multiple single spindle, multiple spindle drills, and then even radial drills. In fact, I worked as a helper. How I kind of helped me learn the trade a little bit, by the name of a fellow by the name of Bob Barter. and he was the main operator, and I was setup man, and I would even got so I run the machine some. I did that from about I think I got that job about the latter part of August, and worked that until I was transferred down to the doze department, and they were starting kind of a little shop down there where they made all the different type of dozers. They were angle dozers, straight dozers, and I worked right down in the welding department. I had five different machines operated. I ran a radial drill, a multiple, a single post, and a tapper, and another small drill. So I worked down there, and I was on my own. Fellow was the foreman, was the welding foreman. He says, "You're on your own." So I got to lay out how the tables were on the drill and everything. I worked there till I went in service in 1945, spring of 45. I was actually putting there almost summer. It was in 1st of June. Oh, I got a lot of good experience down there. Around a lot of welders, but I've made friends out of them, and even some of them yet today.
Now, did you do welding?
No. I run machines.
Mm-hmm.
Run machines.
And that was in what building?
That was the original building. RG built that building in stages. It was right along Grant Street. And in fact, some of the fellows that I've camped with, Bill Banny in particular, and Carl Geik, worked down there when the building wasn't even finished, and even worked outdoors in the wintertime.
Wow.
Can you believe it?
That was called Plant 1.
Plant 1. That was the old Plant 1. Extended right out, clear out. In fact, they dredged dirt out of the river to build some of it. And they were just finished the very last section in 1940 when I started working there.
Mm-hmm.
Then the year I started working there, that fall, RG bought what used to be the old Avery plant. And there were some machines in there. He used some of those. And then there was a number of buildings that he used there.
And you worked in Building M, right along Adams Street for a
That's
time.
correct.
Was that
For quite a few
after?
years.
Was that after your service in the Navy? You worked there?
That's
No.
correct. That's right. I never worked there until after I came home from service. I was transferred over there a couple of different times, and I ended up working there until they built the new plant they called AA.
Mm-hmm.
And I was transferred over there in about 1967.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And I
General.
continued working there for the most part. I bounced around Plant 1, back to Plant 1, the old aluminum building, back to M, back and forth. But primarily I worked most of my latter years in AA, which was the newest plant at that time.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to talk a little bit about your early married years, and particularly the time when Dad went into service in the Navy. Tell us just a little bit about going into the service.
Okay, Hal and I was married on a 6-month deferment, and we were not in the war at the time we were married. It wasn't until December 7th or 8th when we actually was in the war.
Mm-hmm.
But
declared on
I would
the
Oh,
receive,
you're right, it was
I
declared
would
on the
receive
8th.
most of the time 6 months deferment. In fact, we was married and I just had 6 months deferment. I said, I'm not going to get married unless I can get some time to be home with you. I think we'd like to be better for a stronger marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And I got deferments until the end of the war with Germany. They surrendered in April of 45.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was
And then our equipment was not quite as much in demand. So I was called up. I didn't get a deferment, and I realized that I was going to go in service. So I volunteered to go into the Navy and went down to Springfield, took the exam to be a radio technician. And that's how I went. That's how I got into the Navy, and was inducted into the Navy up in Chicago in the 1st of June, and reported up to the Great Lakes. I took my basic training, which was about 2 months, and then went to school in Chicago at the Herzl Junior College from let's see, it was about the latter part of September until about Thanksgiving Day. And about out of a class of 110, I think there was only ones that went into the regular Navy would sign up for, I believe it was 4 years got to stay on in the school. Most of us were fellows that had been already married and didn't want to make the Navy our career.
Of course.
But it was an interesting time. I learned a lot in basic training and also in the school.
Mm-hmm. And what was life like, Mom, for you at home while Dad was in the service?
Well, we had to make some decisions. We were still living in the pitch house down on 704 Morton Street, and I had David a year old. So Aunt Florence had just had Joycey, and Joyce had been born in May, and she needed help. They had an extra bedroom. They had just bought their Hillcrest house. So I decided to, they okayed it too, between all of us, to talk to it, and they wanted me to move up with them. So I did, and we always had gotten along well anyway, Florence and I. She's as near a sister in those days as I had, and so I moved my dad, and I think you helped move the furniture up. But we had to break up we had 3 rooms of furniture, about 4 maybe. And I moved up the living room rug and put it on the bedroom floor. I moved up my bedroom suite and moved up David's crib, David's high chair, and our clothes. And that's about all I moved. So then we had to pack up all the dishes and so forth. And Mrs. Pitch said, I've got an attic. You can put them up on my attic. She lived up on 2nd floor. So anything we didn't take with us, the pots and pans and that sort of thing, we stacked up and boxed up and put in her attic. And I think I did most of it. I can't remember, so I probably had some help because I don't think I carried it all. Well, then I had the refrigerator, and I didn't know what to do with that. So that was a pretty precious item. That was one of the reasons we bought our furniture. It was about 3 years old, so Aunt Nell needed a refrigerator in Elmwood. So Dad put it on his truck, and they took it to Elmwood, and we loaned it to her. I didn't sell it to her. I loaned it to her. And so she had it the year and a half or so that Dad was in service, because you were in a year, weren't you?
Just a year. Mm-hmm.
And the rest of the furniture, Mrs. Pitch took my Davenport and chair and used it. I just let her use it. I had no place to put it. I kept my stuff together. And so then it came time for Dad to come back home, which when the war was over, peace was declared with Japan, Germany in May, and with Japan in August of that year. So we were quickly out of the war as far as we were concerned. Well then, as Dad had to wait his points out, since he hadn't gone in very long, and the older fellas had been in the service longer, they got to come home. There was one period of time Dad could have got out of there if he'd known about it, if he just volunteered to ask him to let him out. And that was just shortly after peace was declared, but we didn't know it. And so then he had to stay in service until the next April to get his points. And he come down with the mumps in service. And he came home the weekend before he got the mumps. So who got the mumps? I did. And we had Mary Helen on the way. Dr. Campbell told us, he said, if you want a second child, David was 2. And he said, if you want a second child, get busy and the government will pay for your second child. Because he was in service when I got pregnant. So they did. But in the meantime, I got the mumps from Dad. And of course, we lost the little girl 4 years later. And that was partly caused from measles. Or mumps, I mean, not measles. So Dad got released then. And our main trouble down here was trying to find a place to live. Peoria had not been building any houses. We'd given up our half a house down with Mrs. Pitch. And jobs were even scarce for the servicemen as they come back. But Dad was lucky on that. He had a job waiting for him. And he came back to that. So I was down with the mumps, and Robert and Florence found out about this house on Fry to be for rent. And it was $40 a month with a garage. It wasn't much, but it was a place to live and get out of the relatives' here because we'd been living with them for a year. And so I was over to Mother's. I went over there to help take care of her. She'd had some surgery done, and she was in the change of life, and I went over to take care of her, and I come down with the mumps. She ended up taking care of me and David, because I had David with me. He wasn't any trouble. He was about like your little Jim. He was a good kid. And he was walking and talking by then. He was 2. And so I had to keep me flat on my back because I was pregnant with Mary, and Dr. Campbell ordered me to bed. I had to stay there. Well, in the meantime, Dad come home, and he'd just gotten over the mumps, and he'd had them real hard. And he didn't feel very good. But the deal was on the house. We got it rented and so forth. I had to put the furniture in it. We had to have it in there for the insurance. Well, that was another I had something else I had to deal with. And of course, being a woman, I didn't move the furniture. But there again, Dad and his truck, Robert's truck terminal, and
You mean your dad? Yeah.
my dad with his truck, and Robert with his truck terminal. He had his. No, he didn't. Don't think he was.
No,
He didn't.
Dad
No,
had,
he
Dad
didn't.
had a dump truck.
It
Coal
was just
truck.
Dad's dump truck.
Oh, God.
They hauled all the furniture up. Robert and Dad and Marion and Kenny, Marion Hurtline and Gene were friends of ours, and they hauled all the furniture and set it all in there. Well, we had the electric hooked up and the water hooked up, and so the house was ready. And Dad and I went over there and we moved the crib over, and Dad says, "You know, Helen, I don't feel very good and I'm tired of being tied down. Let's get out of here."
Run a tape.
Okay.
That's
Oh
it.
no!
That's good. Got it. That's good enough.